All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to the regularly scheduled meeting, the Land Use and Transportation Committee. This meeting will come to order. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee, and to my right is Supervisor Weiner, the vice chair, and on my left is Supervisor Aaron Peskin. The clerk of the board today is going to be, the clerk is Angela Wong, and also want to recognize Phil Jackson and Nona Melkonian and SFGov TV who are assisting us with this broadcast this afternoon. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes, please silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the November 8th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, could you call items 1 through 7 together?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Item number 1, ordinance repealing the 2013 building code in its entirety and enacting a 2016 building code. Item number 2, ordinance adding the provisions of the 2016 California Residential Code with local amendments into various chapters of the 2016 San Francisco Building Code. Item number 3, ordinance repealing the 2013 Electrical Code in its entirety and enacting a 2016 Electrical Code. Item number 4, ordinance enacting a 2016 San Francisco existing building code and consisting of the 2016 California existing building code with San Francisco amendments. Item number 5, ordinance repealing the 2013 Green Building Code in its entirety and enacting a 2016 Green Building Code. Item number 6, ordinance repealing the 2013 Mechanical Code in its entirety and enacting a 2016 Mechanical Code. And item number 7, ordinance repealing the 2013 Plumbing Code in its entirety and enacting a 2016 Plumbing Code.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I know that was a mouthful. Appreciate it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a presentation from a DBI staff person. Please come up to the podium. This is 1 through 7. All right. Okay. Please continue. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kirk Means from the Department of Building Inspection, and I work in their Technical Services Division. We're primarily doing an administrative action that happens every 3 years when California changes their codes. All of our amendments expire basically and have to be reattached to the new codes. So just by way of a little bit of a history, San Francisco had their first San Francisco building code in 1900 roughly, and in 1906 there was a large earthquake and fire, of course, and that's kind of what building codes are designed for. They deal with those fires and earthquake issues, and after a lot of review, they add those kinds of things into the code. Well, after about 80 years of adding stuff into the code for the issues that they ran across, they finally came up with a building code that was this big. This happens to be the 1984 electrical code, but you know, there was like 6 of these, and that was the entire building code. And nowadays, of course, our building code, you know, is 4 feet of binders, and there's been substantial amendments. So in 1984, California adopted the San Francisco adopted the California Building Code instead of having their own code. And the California Building Code California is required to adopt a model code, a code that's published by an outside company. And once they adopt that, California adds their amendments to it, and that becomes the California Building Code. California publishes its code, Title 24, California Code of Regulations, on July 1st of the year preceding when it's going to go into effect. So January 1st of next year, it goes into effect, and our amendments are tied to that. So our amendments need to be in place so that when California's code goes into effect, our code goes into effect. So there's not a lapse. There's not a separate Sure.
If we're unsuccessful today and we're not able to pass or come to some agreement, and we do not move forward and we miss the deadline, what happens if we are out of compliant with our own code here in San Francisco? How does that work with the state?
Sure. There's just a little lapse. So what happens? The California building goes into effect statewide. Period. And so
that means that the state code will supersede or will step into place,
regardless of what we do.
Okay.
Without all of our amendments. So once our amendments pass, then they go back into effect. But in the meantime, you have a period where people are meeting the California code and not all the specific San Francisco amendments that have made it work.
Okay.
I mean, San Francisco, those first 84 years worth of history for zero property line buildings, fire safety, exiting, all the things that are specific to San Francisco would not be in effect until this legislation went through.
Okay, thank you. Is your presentation finished?
No.
Oh, okay.
So in general, let's see. So California publishes its code July 1st of this year, and then we have 180 days in order to, for all cities to get their amendments in place so that everything goes into effect together January 1st of the following year. Our codes have to be more restrictive, and they have to be based on findings of climate, geology, and topography. And we have findings, of course, for all those. In general, we just try to carry forward our existing ordinances. We delete provisions that California incorporates, and we don't need our amendment anymore because they finally understood our issue and put it in the actual code. Or we modify the wording so that it fits within the context of the wording, the new wording that we get from California. California ends their public review process in February, and that's when we start our public review process. So we started a series of approximately 20 public meetings to discuss the code section number changing, the relocation of the different provisions.
Mr. Means, I have a question. Do you participate in the discussion on for the California Code?
Yes, I just got back from the International Code Council hearings in Kansas City. So that's a nationwide discussion, and then that's the model code that gets adopted by California.
Thank you. Please continue.
Let's see. So we start in February with our public meetings. First, the building department staff are all assigned sections of the new code to go through and review and propose corrections and relocation of provisions. And then it goes to the building inspection commissions, code advisory committees, subcommittees, of which I'm the secretary to those committees. There's roughly about 20 meetings, and then the outcome of that is the product that we have before you, hoping to be effective January 1st, 2017 in California with the California codes. There's some trailing legislation that we do plan on presenting at a different time. There's a Better Roofs ordinance that you guys have already passed that will go into effect January 1st, requiring the solar-ready areas to actually have solar in them. And then there's a green roof option for that that's somewhere in the legislative process, I'm not sure, but it will probably have the same effective date. There's a solar permit expediting legislation required by the state that will be doing it right around the beginning of the year, and along with the EV charging permit expediting process as well. There's also anticipated some code cleanup that's going to happen at the same time. And the code cleanup, we have quite a few programs in the code that have been around for a long time, like, for instance, the unreinforced masonry buildings ordinance, the parapet reinforcement ordinance, things that the program has run its course, or at least has ended 10 to 20 years ago, and compliance is supposed to be already taken care of. We will need some kind of pointer to enforce any of those that we come up across in the meantime that still need to upgrade their buildings or whatever. And let's see, the high-rise sprinkler ordinance is another one. All those buildings are supposed to already have been upgraded quite some time ago. Just kind of the significant issues that we addressed in bringing these codes to you is the building code. The International Building Code removed Chapter 34, which is existing buildings, from their document in favor of a whole nother document called the Existing Building Code, International Existing Building Code. So California moved all their amendments to the Existing Building Code chapter to the Existing Building Code, and all of our amendments had to follow. As far as residential, we're pretty much doing everything we've been doing before. We've chosen to pick the more restrict provisions of the building code rather than have a separate residential code that's been primarily designed for Midwest or the Valley, where there's large separations between buildings, 1 and 2 story buildings, that kind of thing. But we've been using the building code for quite some time, at least since 1984, with a pretty good history, so we're continuing to do that. Cal Green, California's green building code. San Francisco had a green building code before California did. So when California came out with theirs, we integrated the provisions that we already had in our own green building code into California's, and we're continuing that on. Some of the requirements are required through compliance with the outside agency called Leadership in Energy Efficiency Design, and and they've changed their software version from one version to another. And a long story short, that changes all of our requirements. So Department of Environment did a few studies on comparison between then and now, and as well as a cost-effectiveness study that's required to be submitted to the Energy Commission along with our legislation. Plumbing, electrical, and mechanical. Most of those didn't have any substantive changes. There are more clarifications. The code seems pretty clear sometimes, but as you get questions from the public and different situations, sometimes the need comes to try to make clear what was meant. And so our chief plumbing, electrical, mechanical inspectors take down all the issues that they run across over a 3-year period and try to address them in rolling this legislation forward. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Means. Appreciate the presentation. Colleagues, do we have any questions for the representative from DBI, Mr. Means? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much. Colleagues, is there anything that you'd like to add? If not, I'm going to go ahead and open up public comment. Okay, public comment is closed, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse me. Public comment is open, ladies and gentlemen. Please come up to the podium. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. As a reminder, you'll hear a soft chime indicating 30 seconds remaining on your time. If you'd like to come in and talk about items 1 through 7, please do so. Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Thank you. Colleagues, we have a motion on this. Just as an FYI, these items are agendized as a committee report just to ensure that they can be adopted and signed and operative by January 1st of 2017. Is there a motion?
A motion to forward as a committee report with recommendation.
All right, thank you. And without objection, that motion passes. Madam Clerk, could you call item 8?
Item number 8, ordinance repealing the current San Francisco Fire Code in its entirety and enacting a 2016 Fire Code.
Thank you very much. I believe we've got the fire marshal here to present on this item.
I'd like to speak first.
And before we hear from you, sir, we'll hear from Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I know we'll be hearing from the fire department. There are a couple issues that we need to address today with amendments relating to the fire code, and we have worked with the fire department. I don't want to speak for the department, but my understanding is the department is in agreement, and the goal is to maintain the status quo. Colleagues, I do have pending legislation relating to several aspects of the fire code that, in my view, those amendments are important in terms of allowing us to make our streets safer for all users, including drivers, including pedestrians, including cyclists, including transit users. We do have some disagreements with the department, and we will, in the next several weeks, be meeting with the department to try to work out those disagreements if possible. But until we are able to go through that process, I think it's important to maintain the status quo. And so I have distributed amendments. Most of the amendments are actually technical amendments requested by the department. But the 2 amendments at issue are, number 1, several years ago, I authored fire code legislation to make it easier to install pedestrian bulb outs and to make clear that when you have a bulb out that is no higher than 6 inches and that has no obstructions on it, that does not count towards the minimum clearance required, because a fire truck, if needed, could drive over one of those bulb outs. Bulb outs play a really important role in pedestrian safety, in particular by increasing visibility, reducing crossing distance. And so the fire code as submitted by the fire department and the fire commission did strip out that legislation that we had, that I had authored and the board had passed several years ago. And the amendments I'm submitting today reinstate that previously passed legislation, and that is on page 42, starting at line 16. The second provision that the amendments I've submitted will strip out is on page 65, lines 24 and 25, and this relates to Appendix D of the International Fire Code. Appendix D increases the typical required street clearance of 20 feet to 26 feet for pretty much every street that has really any street where there are buildings of 30 feet or more, which is pretty much every street in San Francisco. San Francisco has never adopted Appendix D, and Appendix D by its terms states that it's not operative unless it's been explicitly adopted. We have never done so. The fire department and I think myself and others, we have a disagreement in terms of whether Appendix D should be applied. In my view and the view of a number of advocates and city departments, 26 feet of clearance leads to wider streets, wider lanes, faster moving traffic, more collisions, more serious collisions. The fire department has a different perspective, which I respect, even though we disagree. The fire code as submitted by the department and by the fire commission does explicitly adopt Appendix D. My pending legislation that will be heard in a few weeks explicitly rejects Appendix D. And again, we're going to be meeting about that issue to try to come to a resolution if possible. And so we really need to maintain the status quo right now, pending those discussions. So the other amendment would be to strip out the provision in this draft or in this ordinance that adopts Appendix D, so that the code will continue to be silent on Appendix D, and that has whatever legal relevance it has, but to maintain the status quo. So those are my amendments. I have distributed them, colleagues, and after public comment, I will ask that we adopt them.
Thank you. Supervisor Weiner, excuse me. Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to Supervisor Weiner through the chair, you're referring to the language on lines 24 and 25 at page 65?
Let me just, 5. Yes, that is correct, where it says Appendix D, fire apparatus access roads, Section D105 of the International Fire Code is adopted. So we would be stripping out those 2 lines.
Okay, so the document that you just handed out, that's an additional change, right? Because you have on page 42 and 43, you've got some new
Yes.
language, and then so you're saying this is an additional change from what you've handed out.
That is correct, and my apologies, I should clarify. When we prepared the amendments, we did not realize at that time, really until shortly before this hearing, that the department had in fact inserted an adoption of Appendix D in. So you are absolutely correct. The written amendments before you include the cleanup amendments requested by the department, the reinstatement of the bulb out legislation I authored several years ago, and then I will be making an oral amendment to strip out the reference and adoption of Appendix D. And thank you for that clarification, Supervisor.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead with the presentation from the fire.
Dan DeCosio, Fire Marshal.
Dan DeCosio, thank you very much. Please, Dan.
Good afternoon, honorable committee members. First, I'd like to respond to Supervisor Weiner's recent comments just there. As far as Appendix D, it is the fire department's opinion that that was always there in the code for us to address and to utilize as a guide. It was silent on D, but the fire code, unless expressly deleted, the local amendments adopts the entire International Fire Code. That's been the status quo, and that's what we're proposing to move forward. So we're removing those two lines on page 65. However, we reserve the right to use that as a guide, which we've always done on a case-by-case. We haven't just blanketly, in a blanket manner, applied it throughout every street in San Francisco. It depends on the hazards we're trying to protect there, the occupants we're trying to protect there. So it is, again, in our opinion, it's always been there as a guide. It still will be there as a guide, and we'll continue the status quo. With regard to 503, 503.4, we are going to continue the verbiage there from the last fire code into the new fire code. What's important there to consider or to be reminded of is that if we're maintaining the status quo, that status quo should apply throughout all of 503. And in our opinion, that would include 503.4.1, traffic calming devices. My understanding, Supervisor Wiener's proposal would strip our authority, the fire department's authority, to regulate traffic calming devices and device measures. We understand, and we pride ourselves in partnering with other departments in the city to make all our residents and citizens safe in San Francisco. That includes the people, the pedestrians, the cyclists, as well as those occupying structures and buildings. Our perspective, though, is we try to strike a balance. We have operational needs to meet our, for us to fulfill our duties in responding to medical and fire emergencies. And some of those needs are fire department access. It's not just getting to the incident, it's staging at the fire ground, at the incident itself, positioning aerial apparatus, positioning access to fire hydrants, to cisterns, to fire department connections, to fire escapes, position of our aerial truck, the climbing angle of the ladder, et cetera, unsafe angles to climb, et cetera. So we approach each application with that in mind, and we go case by case. Furthermore, I'd like to say, if we look at traffic calming measures, I pulled the records for the last 3 quarters. So going from, let's see, January 1st through September 30th, there were 1,077 proposals. That includes bulb outs, speed cushions, center medians, et cetera. Everything that applies to traffic calming, of which we only disapproved 45 out of 1,077. So I think that's a 94% approval rate. So I think we have shown, the fire department has shown a willingness to partner with other departments to strike a balance for the safety of pedestrians and cyclists, as well as maintaining our access for us to do our jobs. So with that, I'd like to move forward with our amendments here.
Supervisor Wiener.
Yeah, and thank you for that. You know, obviously, I don't want to get into a debate today about my pending legislation that is not before us, that we will be meeting with the department and with rank and file before we move forward. I made that commitment to the department to try to work out whatever we can work out. You know, and it is absolutely the case that the fire department works with other departments, and I'm certainly not saying otherwise. And I think over the last few years, we've improved some of the communication. You know, for the record, the amendments that I'm proposing are explicit, including an amendment that you personally requested and we inserted to make crystal clear that nothing in any of our amendments takes away the ability of the fire marshal on a case-by-case basis to seek additional number of feet, clearance, and so forth. So no one, certainly no one involved in this process, is trying to remove the fire department from this process. The fire department plays a very important role. We want to make sure that our fire equipment is able to move through the streets and to do the fantastic job that our department does. And I will say, having unfortunately experienced many fires since I've taken office in my district where we have a lot of narrow streets, the fire department does a brilliant job on narrow streets getting through. So my hat's off to the department for being able to do that. But we also have a real epidemic of people being injured and killed on our streets, particularly pedestrians and cyclists. We need to make our streets safer, to walk. We need to make our streets safer to bike. We need protected bike lanes, which are really implicated in some of these disagreements that we have. And it's really critically important that we move in that direction. And then I just want to also note, and I've said this to the chief many times, so she's going to think I'm sounding like a broken record, that in my, we did a ride along at the chief's request in a fire truck, and we did a bike along too. And what we saw, and I think it's absolutely true, is that one of the significant impediments to fire vehicles are double parked cars. So they're not just bad for cyclists when they block bike lanes and they block Muni and they cause traffic jams, they block fire vehicles. And I'm gonna, again, I hope that at some point the fire department will ask SFPD and the MTA to start doing much more serious double parking enforcement, because that is a fire hazard when a double parked vehicle is causing a traffic jam and impeding the ability of a fire truck to get through. But I look forward to these conversations, and today we simply want to preserve the status quo so that we can have those conversations.
Agreed, and thank you for those comments. At the sake of not getting in a debate here, I'd just like to follow up one thing on that. Our street widths for access and traffic calming devices are not necessarily the same. There's some overlap on that. And for the status quo, if we're going to work and maintain what we've already been doing case by case, that would apply to traffic calming measures as well, which is for a future discussion. I will move on then right now.
Thank you.
Okay. As you know, supervisors, every 3 years there's a new code cycle. We repeal the existing current code and adopt the new code. And in the adoption process, we basically, for the most part, roll over the majority of what the existing code was into the new code with some minor changes of sections, et cetera. We do have some additions, though. We have 14 or 15 of them, which I will highlight today and speak to any questions you may have.
If I may, Chair.
Yes, Supervisor Peskin?
But at base, it seems like we have two conflicting public safety policy issues that are the subject of these amendments. On the one hand, as Supervisor Wiener says, having wider streets, which allows for faster moving vehicles, brings about pedestrian safety issues and attendant fatalities and injuries. On the other hand, the department's ability to get to a fire in a timely fashion evokes other public safety concerns. Is there an ongoing dialogue between, I guess presumably this would be the fire department on the one hand and the MTA and or planning on the other? Is this being done at the staff level?
Yes, there is an ongoing discussion that goes on, and it's usually through our task committee and through our Captain Balmy, who represents the fire department on that committee, and we deal on an ongoing basis with MTA, specifically on all these, all our issues, concerns, any differences, et cetera.
And so it would be in the task committee where those 47 proposals were rejected out of the 1,000?
Correct. So we had 1,077, we rejected 45, there's one on hold. So I think we do find compromise. We do try to partner with the other departments to make everyone safe here in the city.
And relative to the concerns that fire has about the height of curbs, can you explain those to the committee?
So the height of curb, 6-inch curb, our proposals here put forward are a result of feedback from the field, from battalion chiefs, division chiefs, engine and truck operators, drivers, et cetera, and them expressing their concern about not being able to mount a 6-inch curb. It's one thing to pull up along a 6-inch curb and say, okay, I'm going to step out on the curb and access my equipment. It's another thing to actually drive over the curb with an engine or a truck. And again, and in doing so, we don't think it's safe. Our members would avoid that at all costs. I think if we're not over the curb, then that impacts our ability for other apparatus on scene to position themselves to get around staged vehicles already in place. It poses a number of different problems. So we are against that. We could, again, we are open to compromise if we can have a lower curb with more of a setback. I mean, there's ways to achieve the same intended goal, but just to say the 6-inch curb, we are, again, we're struggling with that proposal. But again, it's part of the code that was in 2013. So far, we've been successful in going case by case, so it hasn't negatively impacted us to a point where we can't do our job. But again, moving forward, I think we can improve upon this, and it would be that would be our recommendation.
Thank you.
Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, and thank you for that question, Supervisor Peskin. Actually, a few years ago, during the interregnum in District 3, I think. So
During
you weren't.
the what?
Interregnum.
Interranium.
Yeah,
Okay.
in District 3, before Supervisor Peskin came back. We went through a significant discussion around Candlestick Point, and this is where it plays out the most when we're building a new neighborhood and determining the width of the streets. And there was a huge disagreement between planning and MTA on one hand and fire on the other hand. And we convened an interdepartmental working group to de-escalate things. And to their credit, all the departments really came together in a positive way. So some of the streets, especially the larger arterials, would be a little wider. The more residential streets would be narrower. And it was a really good template. And the desire at the time was for that template to apply for future developments, so it's Treasure Island or Park Merced or whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, at times, things get relitigated, and one of the reasons we did the legislation is we want to just have some consistency. We don't want to have a fight every single time we're building a new development.
But not to go off on a tangent, but my recollection at Treasure Island was not street widths being the problem, but turning radiuses being the problem because of the diagonal nature of the proposed street layout.
Well, there may be other issues, but what we've heard from folks in the development community who are actually designing that it's a continual issue in terms of, the fire department is not a criticism. It's just they prefer to have the 26 feet clear on as many streets as possible. And I think some of us think that is not the right way to go because it leads to a lot of streets being very, very wide and faster moving traffic and more injuries and deaths on the streets. And so that does come up in pretty much every development where the street grid is being designed. And so that, but again, we've been convening the departments. We're going to be meeting with the fire department. We want to try to come up with a good resolution.
So this is really specific to, there's not too many places in this town where we're going to be building new streets. So this is really specific to the shipyard project, which it sounds like has been settled, TI, which I believe has been settled for better or for worse, and Mission Bay, which is long since been settled.
Park Merced and Schleglock, there will be others. And so it comes up in smaller ways when streets are being redesigned or sidewalks widened or whatever the case may be. It does come up, but it comes up in a much bigger way when we're creating a new development.
If I may, we don't see this as preferred or not preferred. We look at it as our operational needs to do our job. And it's a case by case. We go to the site in question. We look at what is there, what are we trying to protect, what is the occupancy of the building, the height of the building, the age of the building, et cetera. We take all those considerations in mind when we respond to any of these proposals. Again, we're trying to protect the people of San Francisco from fire and medical emergencies as well as the pedestrians and cyclists. I can proceed with going through each one of my items. I don't know if you've all read this already, and I can take questions. However you'd like me to proceed, I'm happy to move forward.
Thank you. I think if you were to give us the highlight, what are the key items that are most important to you that you want to flag for us?
So access is the main item, which we just discussed. The other issue is in high-rise buildings, these portable walls. They call them horizontal sliding walls, but they're specialized doors, and it impacts our firefighting operations on high-rise buildings and we're trying to limit those on a case-by-case stance in high-rise. And the reason for that is High-rise buildings, we do not do full building evacuation. It's a hold in place. We alarm 2 floors below, the fire floor, and 1 above. And our operations usually come up the stair through lobbies quite often. And for firefighting operations, I think that would negatively impact our needs of accessing the floor on those horizontal sliding doors. So we're proposing to not allow or disallow them, or on a case-by-case, depending what the situation is, and make that judgment. So that is a major change. Let me see, just quickly to refresh my memory here. Obviously, we have a lot of, there's other legislation that's come forward from Supervisor Wiener, Supervisor Tang, and Supervisor Campos. They're all in here, and we're on board with that. Okay, and that's the main, those are the main items, I would say. Those are the main issues. Happy to answer any questions.
Question for you, Dan. How long have you been the fire marshal?
On an interim role, I mean, including my interim time, it's been about 1.5 years.
Okay. And obviously this matter is very important. I'm curious to know why you didn't make the rounds to brief members of this committee.
With regard to?
These items.
Okay, which items in particular?
Item 8, the whole topic that we're talking about.
Okay. Well, if we look at the proposed changes, we are not proposing to change anything. We're with access. I'm assuming we're talking about access now. The status quo is going to remain the status quo. I would say that Supervisor Wiener's proposal is changing the current 2013 to 2016 code and eliminating 503.4.1. That was in the code, the last code cycle. We wish to maintain that. Appendix D, we are silent on Appendix D. We're not putting that in there at the wishes of working with, in an attempt to work with other departments and with the supervisors. So I would say, for the most part, the status quo is in place here, and we are not the ones requesting change on that.
All right, but you are the ones requesting that there's no change, and generally departments make their round when there's an issue that affects them greatly.
Okay. Very good.
And you know, I don't know about Supervisor Peskin, but I don't recall anyone reaching out, offering a briefing, an update on what's happening in this department. So it's just a little bit frustrating to deal with such a weighty issue, and you know, it's presented as incredibly important, but yet there was no due diligence work that was done on the prior to the committee.
I understand, if I may respond to that.
Sure.
We met on a number of occasions with Supervisor Wiener's office.
Yeah, of course you did, because you have he has a problem there's a problem. What about the rest of us here? We also votes on this issue. Particularly, excuse me, I think my main gripe is that you've been interim fire marshal, and I've never met you, or if we have, I apologize, I don't recall ever being introduced to you. And, you know, we're talking about jurisdictions, potential new neighborhoods that are in the southeast of San Francisco. Outside of Candlestick, there's Schlage Lock, which is in District 10. So really, I'm offended that I have not been part of this kind of conversation. You've been focusing your conversation on Supervisor Wiener because largely he's raised issue and he's been pushing you. And now that you're here before us asking for our support, it's just hard to give it to you when we just really you haven't done a good job of bringing us along. Supervisor Peskin has something to add.
I was just trying to understand so I guess in all fairness, and I don't disagree with our chair, because these are very complicated technical issues. I don't think any of us have the expertise to understand the minutia of this, so I want to be very candid about that. But there are two things. In the draft that is actually in our packet, that is item number 8, there is one item, that's the item that Supervisor Wiener wants to redline out. That is the Appendix D discussion. And redlining that out would indeed, I think, preserve the status quo as it was set forth 3 years ago in 2013. The second issue, which is laid out on page 42 and 43, having to do with section 503.2.1, is actually new news to us because Supervisor Wiener has just made those amendments in front of this committee. So that's the one. I'm fine with returning to the status quo on Appendix D, and because you guys added that to this draft, and I think that given, in the normal course of business, what I would suggest we do here is continue this so that Supervisor Cohen and myself can have meetings with the departments and the advocates and what have you. But given the time frames that this actually has to be tendered to the state of California on or before December the 1st and asked to go before the board for 2 readings and all the rest of it, we can circle back and try to fix some of these things. But I would like to focus on section 503.4 because that is the new language. And what I hear our fire marshal saying is that you would like to return that to the 2013 status quo. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And-
If I may? Oh.
Sure. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you what specific changes, I mean, insofar as the status quo seems to be working out of 1,077 proposed projects, you guys have only rejected 45 of them at the task, which is a teeny tiny percentage. Insofar as I think we all agree that we want our fire apparatus to be able to move around this town, a lot of which is built with 0 lot lines and out of wood, and we've seen fire after fire, particularly in the Mission. We want to make sure that you guys can do your job. So we have a balancing act to do here between PED safety and our desire, I think our unanimous desire to achieve Vision Zero, and at the same time make sure that we're not losing hundreds of units to fires and all of the life safety issues attendant therewith. So what I guess I'm advocating for is maintaining the status quo that was set out in the 2013 fire code. And it sounds like by removing the lines on page 65, which I'm absolutely fine with, and maybe tweaking or understanding at least what you are saying relative to section 503.4, maybe we can walk out of here with the status quo and still meet our deadlines with the state of California.
I agree. And we're proposing to leave 503.4 as is, moving forward with the understanding that the Section 503 for fire department access will remain the status quo. If one of those sections within 503, subsections, is removed, it will affect our ability to review and either approve or disapprove or to work with other agencies in reviewing these proposals for our access, and specifically that's 503.4.1. So what we are proposing is, given the late hour in this, and I do have to back up and apologize to this committee that there was no intention to disrespect anybody on this committee. I would have to say, as relatively a new fire marshal, been in here a year and a half, my assumption, and again, you should never assume, but my assumption was this: if we're going to continue this, what was already there for the previous 3 years into the next cycle, I would assume this was already vetted. This wouldn't have been so controversial, and that was an assumption. That was a mistake on my part, and that will not happen again. With Supervisor Wiener's proposal with 503.4.1 that is coming up at a later date here, that is a significant change, not what we are putting forward. What we're putting forward is to continue what was in the 2013 code.
Okay, I have a quick question, and then Supervisor Wiener has a question. I was wondering, is there agreement between your department and MTA on how to calculate the street width?
We do have an understanding, yes.
An understanding.
Understanding is, well, yes, if I may, the 6-inch curb and whether there's shrubs there and whether there's a utility pole, and there's so many different things that have to comply. We take that all into account, and it's a guide, and we try to achieve that, which we do on every one of these proposals case by case. And again, the numbers will reflect we do that, having approved 94% of these. So yes, my answer in total, in general here, yes, we do have an understanding. We have been able to again, strike a balance and come to a compromise.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Wiener?
Thank you. I just want to make sure we don't have any confusion here, because unless I think unless I misunderstood Supervisor Peskin's question, there might be a misunderstanding here. The amendments that I'm offering today, putting aside the technical amendments the department requested, the two amendments that I described are maintaining the status quo. One is the Appendix D amendment to maintain the status quo and deal with that issue later. But the Section 503 amendments that I'm offering today are maintaining the current status quo and what is currently in the fire code, and the department has indicated that it does not object to reinserting that. This is in the code today, and we simply don't want to strip it out, so it maintains the status quo. What the fire marshal has been referring to in terms of changing the status quo is legislation that I have pending that is not before us today that we're going to continue to discuss. Right. And so the amendments I'm offering today maintain the status quo.
All right, thank you, Scott. We've just looked up the code and we agree it is in the code. Supervisor Peskin.
The chairwoman just said precisely, yes. I just pulled the code down, and I don't know when this was added, but Section 503.4 in the existing code actually has the language that Supervisor Wiener is suggesting be put back in. So presumably what you gave us took that out. So if the theory here is we have to get this out today, then that is actually maintaining the status quo. But insofar as it sounds like we're going to revisit this in the weeks and months ahead, we'll hear from the public, but I think I can vote for both of these amendments.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Do you still have more to present?
I'm just here to answer any questions.
All right, colleagues, are we good with the fire marshal? Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and go to public comment at this time. I've got two comment cards. First, I have Nicole Ferreira and Brian Wiedenmeyer. If there's anyone else that'd like to speak on this item, on item 8, please come on up, and you may get in line and speak after Nicole and Brian. Thank you. Welcome, Nicole. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nicole Ferrara. I'm Executive Director of Walk San Francisco. Thanks so much for taking the time to discuss this really important issue, supervisors. I'm really glad to see the amendments that were introduced by Supervisor Wiener to make sure that the fire code does stay as is, and I'm really grateful to the fire department for compromising on those amendments. We know that speed kills. We know that that's the number one cause for deaths on our streets, and we know that that's preventable, and I think many of you have seen this. That's a graph by NACTO, which is the National Association of City Traffic Officials, and what it shows is that for every meter wider that a street is, speeds increase by almost 10 miles per hour. So that shows the importance of slowing down speeds and calming our streets. And I also want to highlight that traffic calming is one of the quickest, most cost-effective ways to improve safety on our streets. And speed humps are the best way to do that. And unfortunately, over the last couple of months, we've seen that the fire department has opposed a large number of speed humps on our city streets, and in fact has denied any future traffic humps, from what I understand, from being installed. And these are important safety features for school zones and other areas. We also know that, according to a civil grand jury report, Supervisor Peskin, in response to some of your questions, the top reasons for the top reasons why fire is not able to make it to the scene of a fire or emergency on time has nothing to do with traffic calming or lane widths. So I'm happy to share that civil grand jury report. So I'm looking forward to further discussing this legislation, or the future legislation, and I'm looking forward to seeing this legislation move forward.
Good afternoon, supervisors, Madam Chair. My name is Brian Wiedenmeyer. I am the Executive Director of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. I want to thank Supervisor Wiener for his amendment and for the fire department's willingness to have the fire code remain at status quo without Appendix D in this latest version. And I want to we'll be discussing this further, and I look forward to working with the fire department, with Supervisor Wiener's office on his legislation about how we can resolve this recurring conflict that really, I think, has this false dichotomy of pitting the safety of people in the event of fire and medical emergency, with the safety of people who bike and walk in our city. San Francisco does have an official Vision Zero policy, and Mayor Lee issued an executive directive over the summer outlining some specific requirements for improvements to our bicycle network and our walk-first treatments that include things like bulb outs and curbs. So if and we are hopeful the city keeps to its timelines of upholding the executive directive, we need to resolve these issues. People who bike and people who walk in this city are demanding more when it comes to the kinds of street improvements that we see on our streets, and that includes things like protected bike lanes. When we talk about a culture of delay within the city, these are the kind of interdepartmental conflicts between the fire department and SFMTA that we point to most frequently. So, like I said, it's an unfortunate recurring conflict. I am optimistic, based on our previous and ongoing conversations with the San Francisco Fire Department, that we can find some common ground and some resolution. I do think that is going to take the form of a policy change before this board. So we would be supportive of the amendments as proposed and the code being adopted without Appendix D in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Tom O'Connor, President of the San Francisco Firefighters. And we're here today to urge you to adopt this legislation and maintain the status quo. And we'll continue to move forward with conversations with Supervisor Wiener and the rest of the board. But we need to all take a step back and understand that you're essentially politicizing the turning radius of a fire truck and a fire engine and our ability to navigate streets that are already difficult to navigate. So we look forward to having a calm and reasonable conversation with all the stakeholders and move forward what's best for the city of San Francisco. Nobody knows more than the San Francisco firefighters that speed kills. Nobody knows more than the San Francisco firefighters about how dangerous our streets are. But we also need to be able to navigate those streets just as safely as everyone else. So we look forward to conversations going forward to find a compromise and to find a sensible solution for everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members? Chief Hayes White? No? Okay. All right, public comment is closed at this time. Thank you. All right, Supervisor Wiener, you want to recap your amendments?
Thank you.
Make a
So,
motion.
so again, as outlined at the beginning, the amendments I'm going to move are the written ones distributed, which are the amendments requested by the fire department, as well as the amendment to reinstate the Section 503 provision relating to bulb outs. And then an oral amendment to strike out the adoption of Appendix D, as I described earlier. So all of these amendments, I move that we adopt.
Any last-minute discussion? All right, a motion has been made for us to adopt the amendments proposed by Supervisor Wiener, and I think we could take that without objection, Madam Clerk. Thank you very much.
And then, Madam Chair, I move that we forward item 8 as amended as a committee report with recommendation.
All right, and without objection, that motion passes. Yes, we did. We set them as committee items. All right, thank you. Could you call the next item, please? Item 9.
Item number 9, resolution extending interim zoning controls that require conditional use authorization for new office uses facing 2nd Street from King to Folsom Street for 6 months and making environmental findings.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Supervisor Kim. She's the author of this item, and she's joined us for committee today.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Item number 9 is a renewal of an interim set of controls that we passed last year for 2nd Street between King and Folsom in the South of Market. I'm sorry, we passed in October 2014. We worked with the South Beach Merchants Association, who I see some members of here today, as well as our South Park neighbors on an interim control that could support small neighborhood businesses and retail on the 2nd Street corridor, vital to ensuring an active and healthy neighborhood in the South Beach, South of Market area. These controls were originally envisioned as being part of the Central SOMA plan, but we want to move forward with permanent controls on 2nd Street and need to extend the original interim controls for 6 more months while we complete the legislative process. We had originally envisioned that the Central SOMA plan would be before the board this year. It is not. It has been delayed until next year, and that is why we are moving forward with this piecemeal prior. Ground floor neighborhood serving retail is critical to maintaining our diversity and growth and development in the South Market, thanks to the neighborhood's proximity to downtown, existing and proposed transit, and the area's general character is a boon for the city. We want to make sure that with all the office that we're building and residential, that we preserve and enhance ground floor neighborhood serving retail to serve as amenities for our residents and workers, as well as activating our streets. These interim controls are designed to address the pressure to develop new non-neighborhood serving office use on the ground floor in the specific subsection of the Central SOMA plan area and the area immediately adjacent to it by requiring conditional use authorization for those developments during the next 18 months. And committee, we have heard this item before, and I want to thank you for your support 2 years ago, and I just ask for your support again.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. All right, I don't see any questions from the colleagues. Let's go ahead and take public comment on this item. If there's any members of the public, please come on up. The podium is yours. You'll have 2 minutes. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you. My name is Pat Valentino. I'm the co-president of the South Beach Mission Bay Merchants Association. And thank you, Supervisor Kim, for an excellent summary and statement on how and why these interim controls are so important. Having lived in that area and working with those merchants over the past several years, we've seen the ground floor space increasingly go to office. That office space or that space seems to be ideal for some of the new companies that have come into town or startups or expansion space for some larger companies. And this puts incredible pressure on rents. All of our merchant board members have talked about competing rents and are very concerned about their expiring, that when their leases will expire and renewing. It's also a neighborhood that is becoming more of a neighborhood and less just a place to pass through to get to the ballpark. As we see the Warriors come in, as we see the Giants evolve into doing more things with the neighborhood as far as building on the other side of the channel, the ground floor retail spaces are becoming more and more important. So not just to activate the streets, which is exactly what this will help do, but to keep those small merchants alive. When you've got 5 merchants on a street, it is very helpful to each and every one of them, as opposed to just having one on a street and then a dark row of ground floor offices. So thank you very much for hearing this. Thank you, Supervisor Kim. We do ask you to support and extend these interim controls. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Alice Rogers. I'm Vice President of the South Beach Rincon Mission Bay Neighborhood Association. And I also want to thank Supervisor Kim for bringing this forward for us again. We were successful over the last several months in actually saving 3 retail spaces, which are incredibly important to us. We need this additional 6 months to finalize, as Supervisor Kim said, new and final legislation to help activate the ground floor and really establish a neighborhood. Patrick has been very good speaking for the merchants. As the Neighborhood Association, we've been working very hard. You've seen us a lot trying to establish a neighborhood here, which in an area which the city formerly saw as really manufacturing, even though a lot of people lived in the alleys. There's more of us now. This public realm ground floor is an incredibly important space to us. We ask your support on this extension. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Drazzo from, Bishop, but I'm actually speaking on this because I do think it's a very important issue. I don't know how many of you walk through the area in this region, and there's just an incredible amount of construction. And for any businesses to continue to survive and also prosper, especially the new ones that are opening up in this region, it is really amazing that they're able to do this and provide this service for the community. So I really urge you to support the interim controls. If that's helping them continue on in this region, I really urge you to do this, because otherwise it could be someplace, very similar to, like, closer to Beale Street, where there's just no activity, there's no public realm. It is the merchants on these areas that kind of go through the hardest times when they don't have sidewalk access, when they don't have delivery access, but still provide services for people who work in this neighborhood, who live in this neighborhood. I really take my hat off to them and hope that you can support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak on item 9? Okay, public comment is closed. Thank you. Is there a motion for this item? Colleagues, is there a
I move that
motion?
we forward with recommendation.
All right, motions that we move with a positive recommendation. Supervisor Kim?
I just want to thank Mr. Valentino and Ms. Rogers for being here today. Thank you for voting, Ms. Rogers, and Mr. Razzo for speaking on this item.
Okay, thank you. A motion has been made to move with a positive recommendation to the full board. Thank you. Without objection. Madam Clerk, could you please call item 10?
Item number 10, hearing on the status of the Soma Filipinas strategic plan and requesting the Planning Department and Soma Filipinas work group to report.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Shelley
I'm sorry,
Calcitroni.
just a minute.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you, Chair Cohen. A year ago, I introduced a resolution initiating the formation of Soma Filipinas, our Filipino Cultural Heritage District, the first of its kind here in San Francisco. The introduction of this resolution was over 7 years in the making, initiating a year-long planning process that aims to honor and celebrate the Filipino community and its cultural assets in the South of Market District, making the South of Market a touchstone for the regional Filipino community. The creation of this district is part of a multifaceted approach to acknowledge the area's rich history and to preserve its diversity and culture. It also acknowledges the legacy arts and cultural organizations have played in the South of Market, including Kearney Street Workshop, Bindle Stiff, the only Filipino performance venue space in the country, and Cool Arts. South Market is not only home to a thriving Filipino population, it is also includes historical markers such as Bessie Carmichael, the first and only public school with a curriculum in Tagalog in the nation. In the South Market community, Filipino cultural assets include restaurants, markets, murals, festivals, theater, a center for youth, and several thousand residents. In April of this year, the full board joined in unanimously approving the resolution calling for the formation of Soma Filipinas. Over the last 6 months, the work group, many of whose members I see here today, have been meeting with artists, service providers, small businesses, and workers. They've been meeting at Bayanihan Center, the Philippine Consulate, and surveys at 2 major Filipino events in the South Market, the Parole Festival and Pistahan. The work group and the planning department have been sifting through all of this data to include in its strategic plan. Today's hearing is a report back on that very progress. Not only has the work group been at the forefront of creating a cultural heritage district, they have been in the process of community engagement at all levels. And what is important to note here is that, as the community has clearly stated, we want it to be more than just a series of names acknowledging historical figures, fights, and historical moments. We want this community to be a living community in perpetuity, and we're hoping that we are able to use smart and strategic land use control, economic development tools to ensure that we are also investing in and encouraging a thriving Filipino community here in this neighborhood. And I just want to thank all the committee members. I know they meet a lot. Appreciate you all for your work, your effort, and your leadership. And I see that planning is here with a presentation on this item.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. My name is Shelley Caltagirone. I'm with the Planning Department. I'm joined today by Steve Wertheim, who has been the lead on the Central Soma Plan, as well as Bernadette Tsai, the director of the Filipino American Development Foundation and project sponsor for Soma Filipinas. I'm also joined by Ada Chan, the Soma Filipinas community facilitator. And I have a PowerPoint presentation if I can have the overhead. So I started work on the Soma Filipinas district planning effort in April of this year, and my role up until this point has been to gather the community's ideas into a document that can communicate their needs and desires to the city agencies that can help them meet their goals. Before talking specifically about the Soma Filipinas planning process, I wanted to provide a little background on the Cultural Heritage District concept, which is relatively new for the city and for the country. While we are very practiced at managing landmark districts that protect historic buildings and structures, cultural heritage districts are primarily identified by the activities that occur within them, including commerce, services, arts, events, and practices. Safeguarding these intangible aspects of a community require a whole new set of strategies. Currently, the designation as a cultural heritage district does not convey any regulatory controls,
but the recognition has spurred community efforts facilitated by the Planning Department and the Office of Economic and Workforce Development to develop strategies for sustaining the living cultures of these places. In the future, this community-led work may evolve into a more formalized partnership with city agencies to implement a standard toolkit of economic, zoning, educational, marketing, and planning tools, but at this stage, the city is taking an individualized planning approach to each of the cultural districts. Here's a brief timeline of the events leading up to today. Work on Soma Pilipinas district concept began during the Western Soma community planning effort, which occurred between 2005 and 2013. During this phase, the community identified and mapped the cultural heritage assets that constitute Soma Pilipinas, and the Planning Department published the Filipino Heritage Historic Context Statement. The plan specifically calls for recognition of the contributions of the Filipino community by creating a district, and this edict was, again, supported by the Central Soma Plan, which is planned for adoption next year. In April of this year, as Supervisor Kim reviewed with you, the district was created by resolution, and then for the next 5 months, a working group got busy developing a list of goals, concerns, and potential strategies to support the district, which brings us to the progress report today. I just want to quickly review the geography of the district. It reaches from 2nd Street on the east to 11th Street on the west, Market Street on the north, and Brandon Street to the south. And while there are certainly many Filipino cultural heritage assets located outside the South of Market neighborhood, you can see from the color blocks on the map that there's a particularly concentrated number of them in this district. And at the back of our progress report, you can find a brief history of the Filipino heritage in San Francisco and a list of cultural heritage assets associated with Soma Pilipinas. In part because this is such a large area, there are also cultural heritage assets associated with other communities that are located within the district, including the LGBTQ assets, which will be the focus of future but separate planning efforts. I want to quickly review the purpose of the district, which was outlined in the resolution. The purpose is preservation and further development of Soma Pilipinas as the regional center of Filipino and Filipino-American culture and commerce. It is recognition of the historical and present contributions of the community and neighborhood, and it is also stabilization of Filipino residents, businesses, and community-serving institutions. So this is the cover page of the report submitted on Friday to the Board of Supervisors for your review. It outlines the purpose of the district, describes the community planning process to date. It provides a draft vision statement developed by the community, as well as draft community goals and objectives. It has a very detailed list of community concerns, and then it ends with progress to date and next steps. There are several appendices, including a list of potential strategies and implementation measures that has been developed by the community, and that will be reviewed by city partners in the next phase of this community planning process. These are the 9, up to this point, these are the participants in the community planning process, the Soma Pilipinas Working Group, Planning Department, District 6 Supervisor Kim's office, the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, and then the community members largely. These are the 9 people that make up the working group. They're each experts in their fields, and they've been able to contribute valuable information about existing conditions in Soma. They each have specialties in the arts and community services and development, in business, and workers' rights and education. When we kicked off this work in April, we met with the working group and the supervisor's office, and we determined that the working group would be in the best position to manage the outreach process. So we relied on them to engage with the community and to report back to the planning department and other city staff. The working group's first task was figuring out what the community vision and goals would be, and to list the number of concerns for the community. They also learned how residents and workers in the regional community use and access the cultural assets that exist in Soma. Over the past 6 months, the working group has talked to people in 4 large meetings. They've conducted over 400 surveys. They've held focus groups, and they've talked to other cultural heritage districts, including Chinatown, Japantown, and Calle 24. They've also held several interviews. They've also had people map the areas in the neighborhood that are of importance to them, the common paths of travel through the neighborhood, barriers to access, and frequently visited locations. And these maps became the basis for a conversation about the unique cultural assets located in the neighborhood. This is the draft community vision, which was the result of many of these conversations. I'll just read it quickly. To maintain and grow Soma Pilipinas as the regional center for Filipinos that facilitates opportunities for increasing the presence and visibility of the Filipino community and guides the implementation of the cultural district policies and strategies in collaboration with public and private partners. There are also 3 community goals developed by the community and in their words. I'll read them briefly. The first is cultural affirmation and celebration to increase the visibility and celebrate the contributions of the Filipino community in Soma, San Francisco, and the Greater Bay Area region. Community building and preservation to strengthen, nurture, and grow Soma Pilipinas' role as the regional center of gravity for the Filipino community. And economic opportunity and equity, develop initiatives for the Filipino community to participate in the wealth creation of the Bay Area. In addition to building a vision and goal statements with the community, perhaps the most valuable result to the past 6 months of community engagement was an extensive list of community concerns. We've organized the concerns into 6 topics: arts and culture, business and economic development, community services and education, heritage and historic preservation, housing and land use, and urban design. There are too many concerns to report in this presentation today, but this list will become the starting point for conversations with the various city agencies and community partners that will help to develop strategies to support the district. Each of the city's cultural districts is dealing with its own particular set of issues. In Soma, affordability of space for housing, for local businesses, for community services, and for the arts is a critical issue. Health and safety for residents, and also the invisibility of the Filipino heritage in Soma is also a great concern. The varied nature of the cultural heritage assets that compose the district, people, arts, businesses, organizations, institutions, traditions, events, results in an equally diverse toolkit for safeguarding these assets. Some of these concerns may be addressed by existing programs that could be expanded or refocused to support Soma Pilipinas' goals, and others will require that the city develop new tools that the community and the city can work together on developing. So this brings us to our next steps. First, the working group must finalize the Soma Pilipinas goals and objectives with the endorsement of the broader Soma Pilipina community, which they've made good progress on in the past week or so. Second, the planning department and the working group must work with key private and public partners to refine and prioritize the list of potential strategies developed by the community. Next, with these partners, we must develop implementation measures, a list of actions, procedures, programs, or techniques that should be implemented to carry out the project goals and objectives. Then we must identify lead entities and timelines for each measure to create an implementation plan.
Excuse me, do you have copies of the presentation?
I do, sorry.
Great. I think if we pass it out, we don't have to read the whole thing. If you can just highlight, that would be great.
This is the end of the presentation, basically. So once we have a monitoring and reporting plan developed for the implementation plan, we'll be ready to publish the strategy and implementation plan and ready to set hearing dates for adoption. We've started to think about potential partners for some of the strategies that need to be developed. At the local government level, there's a broad range of departments that could be involved. At the state level, the California Arts Council is also developing a cultural district program, which we'd like to work with to align the two programs. And then at the non-government level, there are many nonprofits in Soma Pilipinas and Soma that will be engaged in the process. To date, we have made some progress on some of the goals of Soma Pilipinas. In August of this year, we added the Gran Oriente Lodge to the Landmark Work Program. In fall of this year, the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development awarded the Filipino American Development Foundation funding to hire Soma Pilipinas project manager. Next May, Soma Pilipinas will hold a photo day with the city archivist, and they'll work with the Center for Asian American Media to digitize home movies. They're also partnering with StoryCorps to collect Soma Pilipinas stories. They're coordinating with the Invest in Neighborhoods 6th Street project, and they're continuing to collect data on the use of public realm and potential sites for murals and signage. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm available for questions, and Bernadette Tsai is here to speak as well.
Great, thank you. Why don't we open up for public comment at this time?
Hello, my name is Ada Chan, and I'm the project manager for Soma Pilipinas. I wanted to just kind of affirm and reiterate that this is a process report.
I'm sorry, this is not public comment. You're part of the presentation team?
Yeah.
Okay.
That this is a process report, and we would look forward to meeting with each of your offices to actually discuss kind of the details before we come back to the Board of Supervisors with the implementation plan. The implementation plan, we also hope that you will encourage staff and departments to meet with us between now and then to make sure that we can work on these items for the process. The highlights of the plan that I wanted to point out is that what this process has really shown that Soma is a regional attractor. The people that have participated in our meetings have come from San Ramon, Benicia, Union City, Daly City. They have come from around the region. When we look at our website, we see we're getting hits both nationally and internationally. When we look at our arts and cultural groups, we see that over 50% of their audience is from outside of San Francisco. So supporting Soma Pilipinas and strengthening our presence really is a benefit to San Francisco as well as to the community. We look forward to also talking about one of the things we saw a lot of interest and support for within the community was kind of these more visual signages and wayfinding pedestrian-friendly things that we can do for the neighborhood. And we look forward to those ideas being integrated into the Central Soma plan. The community has spent a lot of time working on these, and we look forward to working with the departments on these. In particular, the departments we're looking to forward to working with is economic development. We have had already several meetings with businesses where we are getting 30 to 40 businesses at a time coming to these meetings. OEWD can't run a meeting that strong, and we've done it for 3 meetings already. We've also talked about the capital improvement plan in terms of what we'd like to see budgeted for Soma Pilipina items as part of the Central Soma build-out. We also heard about the arts and the need for art spaces, which you hear regularly. And then also the coordination with the LGBT Social Heritage District in Soma also. So together we look forward on working those things. And most exciting is that a developer came to us last week and is asking us to help with the arts, the 1% for the arts in his development in terms of using Soma Pilipina's arts, textures, design guidelines with his buildings. So thank you very much for your support.
Thank you. Are there any other presentations?
Hi, good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Bernadette C. I'm the project sponsor and the executive director of the Filipino American Development Foundation. What started as a dream and a concept in the 1990s has become San Francisco's newest cultural district and a beacon of hope for the Filipino American community. Soma Pilipinas, San Francisco's Filipino cultural district. Soma Pilipinas is not about demarcating a space, but about uplifting a community through the American dream. For the past year, we've been met with community stakeholders in every sector, from business to the arts, seniors, and students. And one thing is clear, Soma Pilipinas will become a model of community development we can all be proud of. Like all San Franciscans, we face significant challenges in terms of housing, rising economic inequality, but by being innovative, collaborative, and conscious of community, we can overcome these challenges. Our working group has devised strategies rooted in civic activism and, most importantly, new economic development programs that will populate Soma Pilipinas with thriving new Pinoy businesses. Businesses that signal the coming of age of the Filipino-American community. With the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, we can jumpstart a new Filipino business renaissance in less than a year through monthly October markets, outdoor markets, pop-up restaurants, and building a business accelerator that takes the best practices of the tech industry and applies them to community-based initiatives. The arts community continues to be culture bearers and tastemakers in their respective fields, but like all arts groups, they are facing macroeconomic forces preventing them from practicing their craft. In the last 5 years, over 20 art spaces have closed around the city. We want to stem the tide by creating a performing arts center in the next 5 years to celebrate the diversity of Filipino arts that spans theater, dance, visual arts, and more for all to enjoy. We'd like to begin working on the following initiatives. The Department of Public Works can place banners on light posts that provide visitors and residents alike visual cues upon their entry into Soma Pilipinas. Muni and Clear Channel can open up their advertising space for posters promoting the Soma Pilipinas businesses and cultural assets. There are retail spaces at the 5th and Mission Garage that SFMTA controls that can go to any of the over 20 new Filipino businesses that have indicated they want to move to Soma Pilipinas so we can start to develop a commercial corridor. San Francisco's diverse cultural districts is a unique feature that draw visitors and new residents to live here. We seek your commitment to invest in our initiatives that will strengthen the rich cultural fabric of this city, including the long history of Filipinos that have lived here. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else for the presentation? All right, we're going to open up for public comment at this time. Members of the public that are here to comment on item 10, please come forward and come to the podium.
Good afternoon. My name is Caroline Calderon, and I work for the Veterans Equity Center. On October 5th, VEC, along with SOMCAN, we had a meeting at the Bayanihan Community Center with our Filipino seniors and service providers to discuss their vision for Soma Pilipinas. Some of the most pertinent questions that were asked were, how do we ensure that the streets are safe to walk for our seniors? How do we preserve our existing rent-controlled units? How do we address homelessness in our district and provide more resources and housing for homeless individuals and families? And lastly, how do we honor and raise awareness of Filipino culture and history through a cultural district? I think a lot of these questions can be addressed when we have the investment of our city departments, and we will look to your leadership to encourage the participation of various city agencies such as MoCD, OEWD, and SFUSD. We look to your leadership so that we can ensure that real people ranging from youth to seniors are included in the planning process. We want to be able to address issues faced by residents, workers now, but also plan for our future youth, families, and seniors. Again, thank you for your support, and let's work together to promote a community planning process within the district so that we could acknowledge the historical trauma that our community has faced and move forward in preserving Filipino culture, our community-based organizations and services, and the small businesses, students, and longtime residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon again. I'm Alice Rogers, this time from the South Park Improvement Association. And I just really want to thank Supervisor Kim and all supervisors for giving attention to this cultural district. I think it's incredibly important. They're a strong aspect of the character of South Park, and I'm really pleased to see all of this focus. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisor. My name is Raymond Castillo. I'm with SOMCAN, Saddle Market Community Action Network. I want to first thank the planning staff, Shelley, for all her hard work, working closely with Soma Pilipinas Working Group. I'm happy with the start of this progress report, which I actually attended the community meetings and even help organize youth, making sure they come to the meeting, and they express what they want out of Soma Pilipinas. Some of the youth that showed up to those meetings were, it went from elementary to middle school, high school, all the way to college. Some were from Bessie Carmichael, Galileo, Mission, Balboa High School, San Francisco State University, City College. Some of the neighborhood they were coming from was Soma, Tenderloin, Excelsior. We have some youth that came all the way from Oakland, and so on. Daly City is also there. Let's see. This just shows how important Soma Pilipinas is. Knowing that, this neighborhood alone is the highly concentrated Filipinos, but also knowing that, folks all the way from all over part of Bay Area come just to make sure Soma Pilipinas happen. It's a beautiful thing. A lot of the youth brought up a lot of good points from they want to see posters to parole on the street, all the way to having a Soma Pilipinas store with a jeepney and tricycle, housing, jobs, and all of that stuff. So we look forward to seeing this progress report becoming real and the possible solutions that's outlined in this progress report to happen now. So I hope you guys will support it, and thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Tony Robles. I am with Senior and Disability Action. I'm also board president of Manilatown Heritage Foundation. I want to thank the planning department staff for their work thus far. Soma Filipinas as a concept, as an idea, is a long time coming. And I've been a part of some of the planning meetings, the community planning meetings, and really it brings out the best of the Filipino-American community. We have artists, cultural workers, educators, seniors, business owners that really have a stake and really have an ownership of this community because they have a love for the community and they feel like the community is a part of them. Many long-term tenants, long-term residents who see the Soma area as their home. There are a lot of concerns we have about pedestrian safety. We have concerns about opportunities for our youth. But what I can say, and being that this is the last day of Filipino American History Month, October, that our community continues to make history, and through our community and cultural assets in the community that have been identified, our community is very much a part of the community of San Francisco, and it makes our community that much more vibrant and that much more beautiful. And just want to thank planning and all the efforts here, and let's see Soma Pilipinas become a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Anjalka with SOMCAN. I first want to thank Supervisor Kim for her leadership and really working with the community in figuring out how can we preserve the existing community, but also provide prosperous ways to help the community grow, from business to youth development or workers program and such. So we really thank you for your dedication and your work with us. I also want to thank planning staff Shelley for her hard work and working closely with the Soma Filipinas working group. Again, just creating a progress report, I didn't realize how tedious it was till I went through it myself, and it was a really amazing process, and I feel really privileged to be part of this process. But as any progress report, we would like to see real investment in it. We want to make sure this living document stays alive and that real investments from city departments through your leadership will really be part of that. So we really would like to see and meet with DCYF, the MTA, OED, MOCD, and as well as continuing to work with the planning department to really figure out how to make sure that the area isn't just another progress report, but actually a real Filipino cultural heritage district that would thrive and really help the Filipino community prosper in the South of Market and even beyond. So I thank you again for your leadership, and we look forward to continue working with you.
Thank you, Angelica. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Chair Cohen and Supervisor Kim. Thank you so much. My name is Chris Durazo from Veterans Equity Center again, and I want to thank you so much for doing this. I don't think anyone's. It's amazing that the history of the Filipino community hasn't been documented like this in a cultural district, in a community. They've provided so much. You can't go in any industry, any place in the world, and not see Filipinos contributing in such a way. Sorry, I'm bringing it up. But, and I think it's really amazing that San Francisco can turn a lot of pain that came from Manilatown and from and people don't even realize, from Yerba Buena Center, the evictions, and turn that into something that's so strong and has I can't even tell you the meetings that are going on all night. It's only been 6 months. You guys all know this. It's only been 6 months, and they have been meeting every night for the past 6 months at different places in different areas, and people I've never even met. It's such an important place for people in this region, in San Francisco, and I think actually internationally, this is a place that people are going to remember, and it's a beautiful thing that we've all been able to be part of this. And, I want to thank you first and foremost for contributing to make this happen. But I think also to be engaged, because what's going to happen here, if we put all of our positivity into it, I'm hoping this is something that we can all, that trickles down to everybody in the whole neighborhood and hopefully everybody in the state. And I think right now especially we need more positivity in the work we do. And we need to really think that the dreams we want to see, the society we want to create, is something we can do, and it includes us wholly and completely. So, anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is TJ Basa. I'm a San Francisco resident, and I also work with SOMCAN. I want to encourage you to support the Soma Pilipinas district. It means a lot to me personally, and I know to all my friends and community members, to have a place that we can call our own. I was part of attending a lot of meetings, and also prior to that, just talking to people on the streets. And when you mentioned the idea of a cultural district, you can see in their eyes the excitement and the hope. And like Chris said before, it's about time that we recognize the contributions of Filipino Americans to San Francisco. And especially people have big dreams, but to help them make it reality, from helping people stay here with housing and jobs, but also with the arts and preserving spaces. Thank you so much.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Alexa Japiza, and first off, I am a Soma resident, and I want to first thank Supervisor Kim for her leadership and planning staff, Shelley for the hard work and working closely with the Soma Pilipinas Working Group. I'm happy with the start of this progress report, which I have attended the community meetings and even brought my neighbors. I look forward to seeing this progress report become real and that possible solutions that outline in this progress. It means a lot to me, especially just being in the community. It's just there's a lot of things happening in the South of Market area, and I feel that this will truly help everybody in the South of Market become more as a community, despite of what's going on. And I feel that as a Filipino, growing up, I had a strong Filipino community, and I think that this is something that should be recognized, not only here in San Francisco, but also nationwide, and that hopefully this encourages other Filipino communities in different cities and states to have their own community, and that their history should be recognized too. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, ladies and gentlemen, public comment is closed. Just want to recognize the advocates, the planning department, Supervisor Kim. I think this is a fantastic idea, and I'm very excited for the contributions, the future contributions that Soma Filipinas culturally, the cultural district is going to add to San Francisco. As a native San Franciscan, I am just really delighted that we're taking proactive steps in preserving cultures, particularly cultures that are very vulnerable in the city and at risk of being pushed out due to high cost, due to a whole source of different reasons. So I think this is a fantastic program. I'm going to be looking to to model something similar, and possibly in the Bayview community. So I'm going to be looking to. Thank you. I'm glad you agree. Looking to for your wisdom and your leadership on the dialogue that has transpired, so that we can begin to ensure that we've got the diverse culture that made and built San Francisco ever present. Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Is there any last remarks, Supervisor Kim? If not, I'm going to... Oh, okay.
Just very briefly, I just want to thank all the community members for coming out and speaking, but also participating in the process. It's actually great to hear that people feel that it has been a good process. When we first passed the Western Soma Plan a few years ago, I think, the concept of setting a social cultural district for our Filipino and LGBT community just felt really big, because we knew that we wanted it again to be more than just a series of street renamings and statues. We want a living community, not just one that recognizes the history, which is also incredibly important. But I do want to thank the community for really coming out and just getting your hands dirty and trying to figure out how we can make it much, much more than what we had originally visioned. And I just also want to thank the planning department for your partnership in making this a reality. We do need multiple agencies behind us to ensure that we not only have a social cultural district, but a living Filipino American community in San Francisco. And thank you, committee members, for hearing this item and for your very strong support.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim, what would you like us to do with this hearing? How do you want us to file it?
Can we, I'll ask the committee to make a motion to file this item.
All right, thank you. All right, Supervisor Peskin's made a motion to file this as heard, this hearing as heard, and without objection, this motion passes unanimously. All right. Congratulations. We have another hearing, item number 11. Madam Clerk, please call that item.
Item number 11, hearing on the local impacts of the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, if approved by the voters in November, including areas of legislative and administrative need, and requesting the Cannabis State Legislation Task Force to report.
All right, thank you. All right, this is our final hearing for the day. This is item number 11. Supervisor Weiner, do you have any opening remarks that you want to give us?
I do, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for calendaring this item. Colleagues, today is an oversight hearing to hear from our state cannabis legalization task force, which is currently meeting over the course of this year. Colleagues, you'll recall that I authored legislation to create this task force. The board passed that legislation unanimously. We then made appointments to the task force, and its final report is due in January or thereabouts. I want to thank all the members of the task force, as well as the various city departments and the school district who are supporting the work of the task force and working collaboratively with our community members. And of course, the purpose of this task force is to plan for the possibility that the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, basically cannabis legalization in California, will pass next week. If that happens, then cannabis will become legal for adult use in California on January 1st, 2018. We need to make sure that we are planning for that distinct possibility and that we are able to move forward with all of the appropriate legal and administrative changes necessary to have a great implementation of this ballot measure. So the task force is comprised of a broad and diverse group of stakeholders from within the cannabis community, from our neighborhoods, from businesses, from the travel industry, youth, and so forth, as well as our city departments and the school district. We wanted to make sure this was a very diverse and broad-based group of people so that the recommendations will have the maximum possible support and credibility. So today we will be hearing an update about the work of the task force, and I also want to just note that I've spoken with the mayor's office. Mayor Lee has informed me that he's eager to receive the final report from the task force. He then intends to assign department heads, including the directors of public health and the director of planning, to help craft legislation thereafter and to work with the Board of Supervisors and with the task force and with the community to do so. And so we, of course, welcome the mayor's participation and the participation of his executive departments. So today I want to call up from the Department of Public Health, Mavis Usayadu Frimpong, along with the chair of the task force, Terrence Allen, to address the committee and to let us know how things are going.
Good afternoon, Supervisors Cohen, Weiner, and Peskin. My name is Mavis Asedu Frimpong, and I'm one of the coordinators of the San Francisco Cannabis Legalization Task Force. And I would just note that there's a PowerPoint presentation. If it could be brought up on the screen, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Do you have copies of the PowerPoint for us?
Yes, you should have
Oh,
them.
that's right. We did get it. Thank you. I have it.
As requested by this committee, this presentation will provide an update on the task force's activities. This presentation will have two parts. I will be giving an overview of the ballot initiative that Supervisor Weiner mentioned that would legalize the adult use of cannabis across the state. I'll also provide a brief overview of the task force's activities, and I will then turn it over to Terrence Allen, the chair of the task force, who will focus on the vision and direction of the task force in three main areas: licensing, land use, and public consumption. As you know, there is an initiative on the ballot that would legalize the possession, sale, and use of cannabis for adult purposes across California. The use of cannabis for medicinal purposes was legalized via the Compassionate Use Act of 1996, and in San Francisco, this law is operationalized through Article 33 of our Health Code. In legalizing cannabis for adult use, Proposition 64 also creates a state-level licensing and regulatory system to manage and regulate the commercial cultivation, manufacturing, and sale of cannabis across the state. An important provision that forms the backdrop for all of the task force's activities is that the proposition allows localities to control its implementation, meaning that localities can decide how, whether, and to what extent the law will be implemented within its geographical location. And so the task force has been thinking about this carefully among many different dimensions. In terms of the effective date, as Supervisor Weiner mentioned, licenses within the adult use industry will be available at the state level by January 1st, 2018. Typically, ballot initiatives in California do go into effect the next day. And so on November 9th, it will presumably be legal to possess, use, and consume cannabis for adult purposes. And now for a brief overview on the task force. It was created via a local ordinance, as Supervisor Weiner mentioned, and the purpose is to advise policymakers on matters related to the potential legalization of cannabis in California. It will remain active for a 2-year period. The task force is coming up against the end of year 1, and there will be recommendations in 3 main areas for the Board of Supervisors and public review. The first area would be public safety and social environment. The next would be land use and social justice. And then finally, regulation and city agency framework. In terms of year 1 goal, all of the recommendations will be finalized at the November 9th task force meeting, and the year 1 report and recommendations will be provided to the board and the public later on this year. There are many provisions within the ballot initiative that are important to consider, but we thought to pull out some critical ones that the task force has been talking about at length. First, licensing. The ballot initiative creates 19 different license types across the supply chain, from cultivation through to distribution and testing, manufacturing, and then all the way down to retail sale. As mentioned before, it also creates a state licensing and regulatory system, and most importantly, it creates the Bureau of Marijuana Control at the state level, which would regulate and oversee the regulatory activities for both medical and non-medical or adult use cannabis. The Bureau of Marijuana Control would also provide general oversight and would handle all retailer, distributor, and micro-businesses licenses. The Department of Public Health at the state level would handle all of the manufacturing and testing facility licenses, and the Department of Food and Agriculture would handle the cultivation licenses and cultivation regulatory scheme. Most importantly, under the licensing provisions that the ballot initiative sets up, localities can create their own permitting structures in addition to those created at the state level. And so the task force has talked about this at length. In terms of land use, the ballot initiative states that cannabis businesses may not be located within 600 feet from schools and other child-friendly locations unless a locality sets a different radius. And so here localities can set a radius that is below 600 feet, right at 600 feet, or exceed 600 feet, depending on their priorities and the local tailoring of the law to its location. And finally, with respect to public consumption, generally, under the proposition, consumption in public of cannabis is not allowed. But localities may allow on-site consumption at select retail locations if certain conditions are met. And so with this brief overview of the ballot initiative and the task force's progress to date, this is a list of many of the topics that the task force has talked about over this 1 year and areas in which the task force will be providing recommendations. And now I'll just turn it over to Terrence Allen to talk about the provisions that I just mentioned that will be on the ballot and how these provisions connect to the task force's work and how the task force is thinking about the implementation of these provisions across the city and county of San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you, Mavis. And my name is Terrence Allen, and I'm going to give you a different perspective on what we've been doing. So out of this process, we have engendered certain themes that the task force determined were going to be necessary for us to go forward. The first of those themes was a consensus model, that in order for this group to move forward, each and every one of the 21 members, the 14 voting members and the 7 department heads, were going to have to be able to come to agreement before we could move forward and write a recommendation that would appear in the report that you're going to get in December. To me, that is a big deal. What that means is when you get those recommendations, they are not simply words on a piece of paper. They represent the hard-fought battles in the task force room. They represent the work that the task force members have done, going back to their constituents, and they represent the compromises that have been made in the task force meeting room in order to achieve a compromise on very difficult situations. They're inclusive, and they involve incentives rather than sticks. So we have a huge incentive base and a small but very sharp and effective scalpel. Our meetings are open, and we invite everyone to attend them. Another theme that has developed is the importance of public opinion to our process. In order for us to come forward and for you to be able to vote on something, you've got to believe that we as a task force have done our job and developed public will and that the public is behind what we are saying. So we may have public consensus on our task force. Our members are responsible for going back to their group and getting consensus. And in final, I would say that the stakeholder outreach in developing that public consensus has been key. So those are the themes, our common ground, no matter what we have talked about, whether it's public safety, social justice, land use, or public consumption. The themes that have gone through each and every one of those discussion points, education, the idea that in the long term, I think if we close our eyes in 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to look back and we're going to see cannabis as more of a part of a normalized society. And we're going to have to look at our rulemaking and our decision-making leading us towards a more normalized part that cannabis will play and not see it as a separate element that has to be dealt with in a way different than any other element that society deals with. So normalization is a common ground. We also feel that workforce and entrepreneurship are key The Prop 64 ballot initiative says that, yeah, we're going to empty out the jails and we're going to give everybody a clean slate and we're going to give them a process by which they can re-enter the workforce and they can participate in ownership of these businesses. You know, those words are great, but they mean absolutely zero if we don't back them up. And that's where San Francisco comes in. So Office of Small Business, the Public Defender's Office, all of our small offices, workforce and development, economic workforce and development, all of the offices that we have in San Francisco have got to get ready to start applying for the money that Prop 64 is going to start spinning off through its taxation base, and that money is going to have to come back to San Francisco. And if we are creative in designing the best urban template for cannabis reform, then we will be really good at getting that money, and we will be able to take care of the people that come out of jail. And guess what? They won't go back to selling cannabis on the street corner. If you watched 60 Minutes last night, the governor of Colorado said, well, you know what? I am not going to say this was the most tremendous success in the world, meaning legalizing cannabis, but I am also not going to say I would go backwards in time and go back to prohibition. He said, I would urge every state to do legalization carefully. And so here's a guy that was against legalizing cannabis, is still against legalizing cannabis, and believes that this is better than prohibition. And I think education and opportunity and how we deal with the people that was swept up unfairly by this war on drugs is the way that San Francisco will show that it is a different place from the rest of the world, because we are the place that knows how to take care of the people that were not taken care of properly the first time. And that's really key. That's our social justice platform, in my short words, in a nutshell. How we do that, we're going to spend all next year, and we're going to come up with recommendations and tell you some good suggestions how. And we're going to ask for your help, because we're not going to have all the great ideas. We're going to need your help. So what else is on our list? You know, we've got this great PowerPoint presentation, but you've got it so you can read through it. I think it's more important that I tell you the highlights of what we've been dealing with. In licensing, licensing is a big elephant. I would, on the local level, I would prefer to call it permitting. Let's let the state call it licensing, we call it permitting. So locally, our permitting system, we have to have one. We simply can't be like some counties who have said, if we've got a place for it, we'll let the state licensing system tell us how to do it. San Francisco cannot do that. We will have chaos. The neighborhoods will go crazy. We have got to have something that is responsive to the neighborhoods. And guess what? Our planning code is pretty good when it comes to the non-retail side. It's got a process for all of the non-retail business types, and there's a list of them on page 7, 8, 9 in your PowerPoint presentation. I'll find it if you can't. There's a chart in there. And it, you know, lists cultivation and manufacturing, and believe it or not, we even have a land use, a zoning classification for volatile and non-volatile substance manufacturing. And quite to my surprise, if I bake a brownie, I am engaged in non-volatile manufacturing. God knows how somebody would have thought that I am a non-volatile manufacturing just because I'm a Brownie Mary follower, but that's how the law was written. So on a local level, we can refine that a little bit, and we can say if we have a commercial kitchen properly identified, we can get the people that know how to do these things involved. We can open up facilities to do edible manufacturing with proper labeling and proper controls using the state seed-to-sale tracking program and the advertising restrictions and labeling restrictions. We can get our artisanal chefs involved in this process, and we can open up opportunities left and right that go beyond what the state is envisioning. And it's all there in the planning code on the non-retail side. Now, I can't say what I was just going to say. So the screwed up part, I can say that, right? The screwed up part is the retail. And I don't need to tell each of the three of you that whenever a retail business tries to open, that has the word medical cannabis dispensary in front of it, the whole world grinds to an end. The Planning Commission goes until 1 o'clock in the morning. Their eyes roll back in their head. They have no idea what's going on. Their job was not to vet the candidates who were going to be the operators. Their job was simply to say, yes, the land use says you can open a dispensary. No, the land use says you can't open a dispensary. Guess what? Their job has become the beauty pageant operator. They're evaluating whether or not the guy is a good guy or the girl is a good girl, whether she dressed nice or whether he had on a suit and tie. All of those things then go to the property itself, and when that property gets sold, the guy that owns that property next inherits all the benefits of the person who came before him. And that person who came before him loses all of those benefits because when that person goes to the next place, they've got to start all over again. So our retail cannabis approval system is messed up.
Are you drafting something?
We are going to be drafting something at your request that will delve into that. Alma gives us 3 ways to do it. We've got 3 boxes. We've got a box that says medical cannabis dispensary. We all know about that box. The new box we've got is a box that says retail cannabis dispensary. And for that box, all you need is your driver's license and be over 21.
And you can go, what you're proposing is you can go anywhere instead of being locked into that particular site.
Exactly. And you don't need to go to your doctor first.
And would that also eliminate the clustering factor that we see often persistent in San Francisco?
Well, let's look at that because I think we're going to go through 3 benchmarks.
Okay.
We're going to go through the first benchmark, which is, oh my God, we've got to eliminate clustering. And I'm on board with that because I think it's a necessary evil that we have to agree to. We're going to have to agree that in the opening phases of putting stores around the city, where's that slide? The slide with the map on it. You're going to get a shocker out of this one. Which page is it on? There we go. Nope, next one. There we go. Okay, page 10. This tells you where the cannabis dispensaries are currently located, with one minor exception, and it's because the second Apothecarium location in District 2 does not show up. Look at that map.
So if I'm reading this correctly, it says 12 MCDs in District 6 alone?
Yeah, and 0 in District 4. What does that say? If we are a patient-first medical cannabis city, what does this say about the system?
Well, it says that they just have to go to District 6 to get their medicine.
Exactly. But District 6, over the last 20 years, has changed so dramatically that as a resident of District 6, guess what? Next year, I'm going to be a resident of District 10 because I can't afford to live in District 6. So when I need my medicine as a 30-plus year AIDS survivor with lots of complications in my 60s, I'm going to be looking for a store in my neighborhood that serves my needs. And unfortunately, there's one.
Well, let me push back a little bit because San Francisco is not big. I mean, it's 49 square miles, technically, 47 if you listen to some. So if you need some medicine, I mean, and you live in District 4, you
can taxi?
Well, however you get there, take a taxi, Uber, Lyft, whatever, Muni. But there's a 1 MCD in District 1, which is to the north of District 4, and then there's 2 in District 7. So I mean, it's not like you're traveling any real great length. You're not crossing a bridge. You're not going over a tunnel. So what if there's
What's the big deal, Terrence?
Thank you.
What's the big deal? Okay, so here's my response to that. Colorado had no medical cannabis dispensaries, no adult use dispensaries before they passed their law.
Right.
None. How many do they have today, 3.5, almost 4 years later? 270, almost 300. Are they busy? Yes. Are they all in use? Yes. Could they eliminate half of them? Probably. So what does that mean? They have 150. Denver, Colorado has 300 dispensaries. It's the same size as San Francisco.
Is it the same size? That's my main question. I
million
don't know.
people.
I'll have to.
We're probably bigger when you factor in.
They're probably smaller.
Size-wise. Yeah.
Geographically and as well as in terms of population.
Population were bigger when you factor in the number of people that come as visitors and tourists, which is why we've had hospitality and tourism, culinary, and all of the hospitality industries so involved from the very beginning. In fact, I'm speaking to Cal Travel on Wednesday because they asked, Terrence, what's this thing we hear about cannabis tourism?
Mm-hmm.
You better tell us about it. So I'm going to go and talk to them about that. Well, not a bad idea to talk to them about what's about ready to flush over the state. We're talking about, at the end of this decade, a $10 billion industry in California by the most conservative figures.
Mm-hmm.
In cultivation alone, 250 people in San Francisco County have applied for a cultivation license, have expressed an interest in a cultivation license at the state. 250. We have 20 so far that have made it through the Department of Public Health system. There's nothing wrong with what we've done. We just have a huge challenge to scale. And so the task force during its first year has looked at what we've done, where we're at, what the challenges are. We've dissected this baby all over the place, and we know how it works, what it looks like, and where its strengths and weaknesses are. We have a pretty good idea of what we think we should do for you going into the next year. And I would like a better partnership with this committee and our sponsoring supervisor and our supporting supervisors. In fact, all of you, because you all voted to support the Cannabis Legalization Task Force, including the mayor. So let's have you tell us what we should do next. What is the priority? We can't do all of this at once, but if you tell us, let's take the low-hanging fruit, let's do the easy stuff first, got it. We'll do that first, and we'll come back at you with recommendations for regulations, and then they can go off to the people that know better, and they can write all the words, and then we can go to the committee and debate and make all the presentations. That's the kind of thing that will make this task force a real asset to you. Because I tell you, we have got some smart-ass people on, I can't say that. We have got some really smart people on this task force. Your department heads are brilliant. They're dedicated. They show up at these meetings, and the citizens that you all appointed are really good. They email, they talk, they write, they go out to their constituents. This is not a sit-on-your-butt task force. So let's use them. Let's push them.
All right, I'm going to push you to finish this presentation.
I'm done. I'm here for you.
I love the finishing on a high note. Thank you for your work. The task force, I think, is incredible. I always look forward to the updates that you bring us.
In November.
Supervisor Weiner, thank you for
December,
scheduling this.
Yeah.
This is just incredibly helpful as we begin to get closer to Election Day,
Yeah.
as we begin to become dealing with facing the reality of Prop 64.
Yeah.
As you know, I personally have always been very interested in the work that the task force is doing around social justice and equity. Parity as well. I think you can't talk about equity without talking about parity.
Parity.
And welcome to District 10.
Thank you, Supervisor. I'm here if you have a
I have
question.
no other questions. I think I'm pretty well versed on what's happening. Looks like my colleague over here has none over here. I think we're good. We're going to take public comment.
All right.
And
Thank you,
Thank you
supervisors.
for the work and continue doing
We
good work.
will.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the last item we have, and I've got one card for a public speaker, Ron D. I'm sorry, I can't read your last name. DeZiel? Thank you, sir. Come on down. And if there's anyone else that'd like to speak to this particular item, please come up. Mr. Ron, I just want to let you know that there is no electioneering or campaigning in the chamber, just given the organization I think that you're representing. So just want you're welcome to comment on the task force hearing, but you're not able to take a position or state where you are, make a recommendation to any voters.
Understood.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair.
Thank you.
My name is Ron Deziel. I live in San Pablo, but I'm a member of the medical marijuana community. And it's on that basis that I came here today because in all of my brushings with the task force or members of it, The one thing that I did not hear any concern about was how this Proposition 64 impacts the medical marijuana community. In fact, we're told, there was a couple of articles in the Bay Area Reporter. It featured some dial quotes from Terrence Allen about how good this proposition is and how San Francisco is gearing up for it. But I didn't hear anything about the task force looking at, well, should San Francisco go gung-ho behind this, or should we maybe not have legalization this time because maybe there are some things in here that are so bad that it's not a social justice issue but a camouflage for continuing injustice. So Colorado and Washington, the reports of theirs that legalization has not helped the minority populations there who are still getting arrested at rates that should have fallen. That buzzer confused me. So anyway, I sort of got lost in a detail there, but I wanted to come here and ask you to think about this is not just a gold rush, but you're throwing away some good legislation in the process. The medical marijuana system that we have in place, the Compassionate Use Act and Senate Bill 420, did create a good, viable working system, and that's all going to be shelved just so that some people can come in with legalization, their view of it, to raise taxes of about $1 billion a year. Who's going to pay for those taxes? But
Thank you. I'm sorry, but your time is up. But we appreciate your perspective. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in public comment to share their perspective? All right, thank you. Public comment is closed at this time. Supervisor Wiener, last remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank again the task force for its work and all of the city departments for their support. I'm really optimistic about the recommendations. And we can move forward from there. So with that, Madam Chair, I move to file item number 11.
Thank you. The motion has been made by Supervisor Wiener, and without objection, that motion passes. Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there any other business before this body?
There's no further business.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are adjourned.